So I am creating this video to go over Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 talks about motivation. And so I want to just run you through a few things that I would like for you to pay attention to for Chapter 8, especially when studying for future quizzes. Well, the future quiz that you have coming up in a couple weeks, and then also for your final. Okay, so you can go through the learning objectives on your own. I'm not going to bore you with those. But where I will start is with motivation. So, what is motivation? And I'm sure by this point you've read the chapter and you're able to come up with sort of your own interpretation of what motivation is and also based on your experiences. So, motivation gets into the why of behavior. So, why it is that we do the things that we do. And essentially, our behaviors are directed because of some type of motivation. So we'll talk about the different types of motivations there are. Of course, there's many more than what we'll talk about, but we'll just cover some of the big ones. Okay, so how do we explain behavior? We'll talk about the instinct theory, drive reduction theory, which I really want you to pay attention to. And then we'll also get into the cognitive theories and biological bases of motivation and why we do the things that we do. We won't talk too much about sensation seeking. Sensation seeking gets more into when you're just looking for or you're motivated to do things based on pleasure, or also when you think about those who are adrenaline junkies and like doing risky things. That's what sensation seeking is sort of getting into, but we won't focus too much on that. Okay, so the instinct theory, and let me move this over so you can see it. Okay, perfect. So the instinct theory is from William James, and William James says that we have about 15 instincts that are universal to humans, and this is how we account for our behavior. So some of these you see listed here. I'm sure you know a lot about these already. Think about like sociability, so how social you are, whether you're shy or not, playful, parental love is an instinct, according to William James, but there's also a lot of controversy around this, especially because a lot of times parental love is seen as a maternal or a feminine trait, but that's not always the case. Of course, men are also able or capable of paternal love. And then jealousy is an instinct according to William James, and then curiosity, hunting, fearfulness, etc. Right? So just according to him, he says that we all have these basic instincts, and instincts are innate patterns of behavior that occur in every functioning member of the species. So again, he's saying these traits are universal. All right. So next we have is the drive reduction theory. And so the drive reduction theory states that when we experience something unpleasant, we are motivated to reduce this aversive conditioning. So just like it says in the name drive reduction, we are driven to reduce some unpleasant thing that we are experiencing. So for example, when you're thirsty, what do? You drink. That's drive reduction. You want to reduce feeling thirsty, so therefore you drink. Same thing with food. What do you do when you're hungry? You eat. You want to reduce the unpleasant feeling of being hungry, so therefore you eat. And that's the drive reduction theory. Again, you are trying to reduce the unpleasant experience that you're experiencing or encountering. All right. So that is the drive reduction theory. And also, let me go into this. So Hull says that we have what are called primary and then also secondary drives. So primary drives are going to be those biological things. So for example, feeling hungry, feeling thirsty, those are primary drives. Secondary drives, for example, would be money, because money cannot directly relieve our unpleasant emotions or experiences, but they can indirectly relieve them. So, for example, if you're feeling hungry, I'm pretty sure you're going to need money to be able to pay for the food in order to cure feeling hungry. So that's what it means by being a secondary drive, is that it indirectly helps us to reduce this unpleasant thing we may be experiencing. Okay. All right. So then you have some cognitive theory surrounding motivation. And so it says, what does the cognitive perspective say about motivation? So essentially, it says that as humans, we have this need for achievement. So that's expectations that a certain behavior will lead to a desired goal. So when you set goals, right, of course, you want to achieve those goals. And so that's also motivation. You are motivated to achieve your goals. So, depending on whether you have a high need for achievement versus a low need for achievement, because we all differ in that, that's going to motivate you to do certain things or to behave in certain ways. So, essentially, one of the cognitive theories says that our need for achievement motivates us to perform or to behave in certain ways. All right, and so another motivation based on the cognitive theory is cognitive dissonance. And so this is a term that I really want you to pay attention to because you will see it again. Cognitive dissonance says that people experience psychological discomfort or dissonance whenever two related cognitions or behaviors are in conflict. So I have an example right here for you, down here, you can see. It says, you don't believe in cheating, but you cheat on an exam. And that's cognitive dissonance because cognitive dissonance is when your beliefs and your behaviors don't quite match up. So you experience some psychological discomfort about that, which is very true. So, for example, if you don't believe in cheating, but then you cheat on an exam, you may feel some guiltiness behind that. You may feel guilty about that. You may also experience shame, feeling really shameful for the fact that you don't believe in this, but you did it anyway. So that psychological discomfort or uneasiness that one may feel when their beliefs don't match their behaviors, that's cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance can definitely motivate us to change our behavior. Because, for example, let's say you don't believe in cheating, but then you cheat on an exam. That may motivate you to overcompensate by making sure that you study extra hard for the next exam, or maybe even coming clean about the fact that you cheated. Believe it or not, I've had students do that because they were just, not able to handle the guilt or shame that they felt about cheating based on this theory of cognitive dissonance. So they ended up coming clean about it. Okay, so that's another thing that motivates or drives our behaviors. All right, okay, let's go to the next one. All right. And so these are just some characteristics of high achieving individuals, so people who have this high need for achievement. So they're optimistic about personal prospects or success. They seek higher levels of socioeconomic status, higher levels than their parents usually. They set realistic goals. They usually attain higher grades. And they are usually independent and concerned with success. So, someone who has a high need for achievement really thinks about success all the time and what it means for them to be successful. Okay. All right, so this question you can kind of think of on your own, but it says achievement motivation is just one psychological need that motivates our behavior. Very true. We talked about another one as well, such as cognitive dissonance. So, what do you think are some others? So, just want you to sort of think of or brainstorm some ideas of what are some other psychological needs that motivate our behaviors. And this will definitely help you so that way you can start really honing in on this information and storing it in your memory. Okay. So, now let's get into the biological basis of motivation and what drives us. So, as I mentioned before with the drive reduction theory, hunger and thirst are two main bodily functions, right? That will motivate us to do something. It'll motivate us to eat, it'll motivate us to drink, right? So, just here, I wanted you to, in your own words, to describe what is a drive. Like, how would you describe to someone what a drive is? So, just think about that for a moment. Okay, so we're going to skip past the stomach cues. You're not going to focus too much on that, but it's here for you to peruse at your leisure. Same with this. But something I do want to talk to you about in regards to eating is to talk to you about eating disorders. So, eating disorders are in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that psychologists and mental health professionals use to diagnose people with different mental illnesses or disorders. It's currently on the fifth edition. And so I'm going to go into two main eating disorders that come up a lot and sort of have a lot to do with our motivation behind behaviors of certain things that we do. So, something that's really talked about a lot and researched a lot in America is obesity. And it's really talked about a lot is because it's said that America is a place that a lot of people are prone to obesity, which has to do with a lot of different factors. It has cultural significance behind it, and also just the food that we have here in America tends to be not as healthy, very fattening, and then also the portion sizes too tends to be a lot bigger than it is in other countries. So then the chapter just gets into some of the theories behind obesity. We're not going to focus too much on the theories behind it, but just knowing that these different things do play a role in how someone can become obese. Again, stress is a big one, emotional eating. Eating patterns is another one, of course. Depression and anxiety, again, can cause someone to overeat. If you're feeling depressed, you're feeling anxious, people tend to overeat with that. And then also genetic factors. Believe it or not, there are certain traits or genes that can cause someone or to be more prone to becoming obese. All right. So I won't get too much into dieting. I'm sure you've all heard about dieting and what that is and what is entailed in that. So we're going to skip past that and get to the eating disorders. Okay. So the first eating disorder I want to cover is anorexia. So anorexia is characterized by prolonged refusal to eat adequate amounts of food, and people with anorexia often have a distorted body image. So, something I want you to know is that for someone to be diagnosed with anorexia, they have to be below their BMI, so their body mass index. So, someone with anorexia is significantly underweight. So that's the main key thing here is that they're underweight and they're also refusing to eat or refusing to eat an adequate amount of food. So they're usually malnutritioned. And as it says here, they're usually really, really thin as well. And then the next eating disorder is bulimia. So bulimia is characterized by periodic episodes of binge eating followed by deliberate purging using either vomiting or laxatives. So bulimia is a little different from anorexia. It's still an eating disorder, but it's where a person will, well, for example, I mentioned that in anorexia, the person just doesn't eat. In bulimia, the person overeats. They binge eat. So that's eating large amounts of food in a small period of time. So the individual will overeat or binge, then quickly engage in some type of activity to sort of get rid of that, all of what they just ate. So they may vomit it all up or throw it all up, or they may excessively use laxatives. A person may excessively work out, like maybe say go to the gym 4 times in one day, just to sort of, in their mind, recover from all the food that they have just eaten. And so many people with bulimia frequently manifest depression. So a person, usually this can happen because of depression or anxiety, sleep disturbances, poor body image, guilt, and substance abuse. And also these things here can also be a result of someone who engages in this activity as well. And something that I want you to make note of, I put it down here, but the main difference between anorexia and bulimia is the weight concept. So for example, anorexia, the person is significantly underweight. For bulimia, the person can be any weight. They can be underweight, adequate weight, average weight, or they can be underweight, average weight, or overweight. So bulimia, the individual can be any weight. The weight part doesn't matter. That's more so significant for anorexia. All right. Okay. So we went through the eating disorders, and I guess I'm going to go back because something I want to kind of mention about eating disorders is that it may not be known, but just for your reference, a lot of times eating disorders develop from childhood sexual abuse. You're probably wondering what's the connection there. So essentially, what the connection with childhood abuse and the eating disorders is that oftentimes children may feel helpless, like they can't get out of the situation where they're being abused, and so they feel as though they don't have any control over the situation. And what's one area that a person can control? How much food they intake. So a lot of times, someone who feels that lack of control or sense of helplessness, they will develop an eating disorder because how much food they intake is something that they can't control. So that's the connection there. Okay. All right. So we'll get into sexual motivation. And if I'm not mistaken, sexual motivation may be the last motivation, the type of motivation that we talk about for this chapter. I believe so. Yeah, we don't have that many slides left. But in humans, sexual interest and expression are controlled both by hormones and by the cerebral cortex, so reflecting a combination of biological, psychological, and cultural factors. So as humans, we are sexual beings. That is just it's human nature. It's in our nature to be sexual beings. So, of course, with that being said, sex is a motivation. Okay? So, biologically, when it comes to sexual motivation, you think about our hormones, right? So, estrogen, and estrogen, which is a hormone mostly in females, and androgens is the male sex hormones, such as testosterone. All right. So then thinking, and that's the biological part of sexual motivation. So now we'll get into the psychosocial part of sexual motivation. And so essentially, sexual activity is reinforcing. How so? Being loved. When you're in a relationship, usually more times than not, sex is going to be involved when you're in a relationship. It's reinforcing, right? It's supposed to be a happy time for couples. So again, being loved, and then the erotic pleasure and the erotic pleasure and gratification that's involved, a sense of closeness to another person. So we are reinforced to engage in sexual activity due to these different psychosocial factors. All right, and then you have societal influences around sexual motivation. So this is important because something that heavily influences sexual motivation is how different cultures view sex. Plays a very big role in sexual motivation. For example, sex is often taboo in America, and to me, as a psychologist, someone who studies sexual addiction and sexual offenses and why people commit sexual offenses, sex being a taboo in America definitely plays a large role in why people or how people commit sexual offenses. Um, and if anyone's ever interested in learning more about that, feel free to reach out to me, but I won't get into that too much for this presentation. But yeah, so here you have cultural mores or norms around sex. So, and let's go to this one. So, Danny of New Guinea says that sexual activity is infrequent among adults. That might sound weird, right, for us in America, because of course, usually that's what adults do, they engage in sex. But for this culture, sexual activity is infrequent. So just think about the fact that for this culture, they probably don't engage in much sex. Like they're not motivated to engage in sex. Or think about the people who, let's say, have like high sex drives, but because culturally it's not really normal for adults to engage in sex, that can definitely have an effect on the individual as well. So just something to think about. And I didn't go through all of them, but you can look over these in your leisure and just sort of think about how these different cultural norms regarding sex can influence how someone engages in sexual activity or the lack thereof. Okay. So, last critical thinking question for you to just ponder on your own time is, what do you think has the greater effect on sexual behavior? Nature or nurture? Do you think it's biology that has the biggest effect on sexual activity and us as humans engaging in sexual activity? Or do you think it's cultural? Why we may engage in more sexual activity versus other cultures or other nations or places? So just ponder on that a little bit. And yeah, if you have any more questions about that, I'd love to hear from you. So definitely send me an email or post it in the open discussion and we can chat about it. All right, so that's all I've got for you for chapter 8. I hope that was helpful so you know sort of what to be looking at for the upcoming quiz number 2. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. All right, bye.